Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Gamer Weekly. We're really sorry about the pretty long hiatus. We had some stuff going on in our personal lives that we desperately needed to attend to. So, thank you guys so much for understanding. And with me today is Tom Eastman from Trinket Studios. Thank you so much for
Hi,
coming on to the show.
thank you.
So, if you guys don't know, Trinket Studios just released a game called Battle Chef Brigade, and it's available on Nintendo Switch and Steam. I almost called it Nintendo Steam. So, Tom, tell me about Battle Chef Brigade.
Sure. So Battle Chef Brigade is sort of a fantasy cooking competition where you got your orcs and elves and human chefs. They get ingredients by running out into these arenas and hunting monsters, bring those ingredients back into the kitchen to make dishes for the judges. And it's all sort of wrapped in it's anime style art. And the hunting is sort of a brawler style combat. And then cooking is sort of a Tetris bejeweled match three thing. And then you do different jobs in town to get money to buy new spells and cookware, and you get to play as multiple playable chefs. And it's this big, crazy, surprisingly genuine and charming adventure.
So, you say that it's anime style and it involves food. Have you seen Food Wars?
We have purposefully avoided watching Food Wars so that it wouldn't influence us. But our fans are never slow to point that connection out.
I was about to say, there's definitely some suggestive things that happen in it. So I was like, are we going to see that, or is it just going to be pretty tame? So
Yeah, we stayed away from some of that stuff. We wanted to focus on a few other things in the game.
I do not blame you guys at all. So with Battle Chef Brigade, you guys actually did a Kickstarter for the game. How did all of that go on?
Kickstarter was very stressful, but now that we just launched a game, I realized that it was not stressful at all. Um, we basically did research for about 2 months on other Kickstarters in preparation, and then Kickstarter is particularly scary because you basically make all your money in the first week and the fourth week, and then the middle 2 weeks, if you're doing a month-long campaign, which is pretty standard, the middle 2 weeks are miserable and plateau almost completely. So it's really stressful, even though you know that that's the pattern. It's really stressful going through those 2 weeks of no backers coming in. Um, but I think we did a really good job of explaining the concept of the game, being like, okay, it's fantasy cooking competition and it's anime styled. We've got lots of really good art. This is a really cool concept, and you should back it just for that. And since then, it's been really fun. I just write an update every month, and people have been really supportive, which has been really wonderful.
I feel like with Kickstarter, you have, instead of like how traditionally it is with video games where you have to pitch it to like one investor or like a couple investors, you're trying to get the general public out there. And then if something goes wrong, instead of like, okay, one or two people fold on this and the game just kind of disappears, everybody finds out about it, and then they just continually just give you crap for it as you go on for the rest of your career. So it's really good that it actually went really well for you guys.
Yeah, it was pretty terrifying either way whenever we had to announce that we would be changing something, or like there were times when we'd announce like, hey, we're adding lots more voice acting. Um, and people would be like, oh, cool. But then there are times when we're like, okay, this isn't going to be in their launch. And people were still supportive, but it's really scary that you might trigger one of those avalanches of unhappy backers or something.
You then have to announce, sorry guys, the ending of the game is actually going to be in a loot box, and you might get the ending. So with the game, you guys are doing a platformer slash puzzle game. Was one thing decided first, and then you went with the other thing, or was it like we automatically just want it to be a puzzle platformer?
So we started with a pretty broad concept. We're just brainstorming games, and we're coming up with 2 months worth of bad ideas, and sat down at lunch to feel sad about that morning's brainstorm and turned on the Food Network. which we'd all had some history watching. And Eric, our art director, had gotten me into Master Chef Australia before then. And we just sat down to watch Food Network, and we're like, there are no games that capture this sort of improvisational, creative cooking. So we decided, hey, we could do that. And that set us on a year and a half long journey to try to figure out how to make an action oriented cooking game that felt like cooking, but didn't force you to just follow a recipe the way a lot of current cooking games do it. Um, and sort of during that process, we took a lot of different prototyping steps, um, and moved away from realistic recipes, into the fantasy realm, because that helps solve a lot of issues with some of our initial prototypes were like really chemistry based, basically, as real cooking is. And we're doing like pretty hardcore simulations of each ingredient and how it would be affected by boiling or baking or frying and all these other processes, and analyzing the differences in the process to end up with like a pizza or a quiche or a pie. And that was pretty rough, realizing like, oh, there are a lot of different things you can do with ingredients. There are a lot of different ways you can mess up a recipe, and that wasn't really capturing the improvisation and creativity that we wanted. And so we realized that using fantasy helped get away from like, oh, I just want to make my family lasagna, and let us go a little further away, into people viewing dishes as combinations of interesting ingredients that pair up well or match up well, and let us have dragon in the game. And that seemed pretty strong. And then when we realized that chef uniforms are already pretty militaristic, and same as the sort of kitchen hierarchy, we realized that there's a lot of similarities between like kitchen culture and fantasy itself. And that was like a really convincing argument to really push on that direction. And I think it made both the cooking and the hunting better. And we sort of brought the hunting in alongside that as we were failing to prototype a really fun action cooking game. We sort of like thought, oh, we'll just add the hunting because that's a more understandable, easier to prototype part of gameplay. And it ended up being like, we can make a really fun cooking game, we can make a really fun hunting game, and then we got to find cool ways to bring them together, but it'll make it a better game overall.
So did you feel like your culinary skills individually increased when you guys were doing the research for the game?
Yeah, definitely. we we did some team cooking lunches, to sort of keep ourselves in the right mindset. But then just researching, there are about 200 dishes in the game. And so we had to look up a lot of different cuisines and types of food, and just like perusing Wikipedia articles forever to come up with good, mechanics ideas for the game, so that we could make sure that we're capturing all the different sort of feelings and pacings that you get in normal cooking.
So what was one of the dishes that you learned how to make after researching the game?
That's a good question. I mainly learned the names of a lot of dishes, but did not have not been able to make them. Some of our backers and fans have been amazing, and they've made dishes from the game, and their skill level is way above ours. Um, there's this whole community of people who make food from video games and make actual recipes out of it and then post that. Um, and that whole community has been amazing for this game. They've been really cool. And so I've learned like the name of some really, really fancy pastries, for instance, but I have not attempted them.
Do you think that at any time in the game cycle that we could end up with a Battle Chef Brigade cookbook?
Yeah, definitely. That's something that we're really interested in, and maybe we'll slip some recipes into the art book. I think one of our fans has done 3 or 4 real recipes so far, so it's not too far away from a full cookbook.
So what would you say that you guys learned a lot from besides cooking, like coming up with an idea like this that it's so different than what we usually see, because we see a lot of games that are platformers, we see a lot of games that are puzzle games, and we see some that are puzzle platformers, but not anything that's where it's involves cooking as well. So were there
So yeah, definitely. There are a whole bunch of cases of that. So I'll go with the one that's more interesting to me, and that's the importance of theme to making intuitive mechanics. And so what I mean there is that with the cooking system, if you just imagine a Tetris style puzzle game where there's very little theme or wrapper, you're just in this world of blocks. Um, if you imagine that sort of game, but instead of like this big Tetris board, you split it up into three smaller 4x4 grids, and you somehow were dropping blocks into those. Um, Now imagine that each of those little grids, those three little grids, actually had totally different rules. So one was like Tetris, one was a match three like Candy Crush, and one was like a match two. That would be super confusing and weird. But in Battle Chef Brigade, we can do that sort of thing because those each of those little puzzles are represented by cookware. So you know, like, oh, I've brought in the fire pot, or I've brought the oven to the game or into my duel. And so we can have those sort of different rule sets for each puzzle. And then picking up a dish, a whole puzzle basically, and putting it into another puzzle is perfectly reasonable because you're picking up some ingredients that are in a pile and moving them into another pile of ingredients. And so that wrapper really helped it uh, make what could otherwise be very confusing. The cooking wrapper makes that almost completely intuitive. And so we'd see things like players catching on to um, all sorts of the mechanics in the game like really quickly. Whereas if we were trying to teach that in a sort of um, game that didn't have that strong theme, I think we'd need like a lot of really horrible tutorial screens or something, and it wouldn't become intuitive at all. So that's how I feel on the cooking side, that we really learned about how important the theme can be, and how if you align your mechanics with a theme, then you can do all sorts of things. And that can just be like super awesome. Like players can really easily learn like stirring fragile ingredients can make them break down, and that's like perfectly reasonable. Whereas it might not be in another sort of genre or theme. We had a similar thing with hunting where we realized that we were not making a brawler, for instance, and that it's very different when you're going out. So in a normal brawler, you just sort of like go left, right, and you murder everything on the screen, usually as fast as possible, and you try to get a combo, multiplier, and that sort of thing. But in Battle Chef Brigade, you are more purposeful in what you're hunting, and that's why we call it hunting and not just like murdering or something, or brawling. And so some of the game design really had to be changed to allow for that, and we were able to build more ecosystems into the game. Like you can collect some vegetable and then leave it on the ground, and then the steel birds, they're called cheap cheese actually. Steel bird was the code name, the original name. The cheap cheese will come and eat it, and then if you let them fly away, they'll land and lay an egg, and then you can decide whether or not you want to pick up that egg or let it hatch or break it to get a sauce. And so we ended up sort of realizing that we're not making a brawler where it's about the killing, it's about getting ingredients, and that really changes what a character's move set should be, and like what sort of gameplay is effective and exciting for the players. So we really learned that even though we're sort of mashing up genres, we're also changing them and can use the whole sort of cooking and ingredients themes to make them a lot better and more intuitive.
So when you're doing the hunting, is it more of like in the center is where all the cooking happens, and then around all of it is certain areas that have like certain monsters in it, and you have to go to those certain areas to get the ingredients that you need? Is there like a prerequisite on what you need before you go into the actual cooking, or is it like you have this stuff and you can make this while you're cooking?
So I wanted to keep it really free form, but it all happens like within a single duel. you start in the kitchen and then you run out to one of the three biomes that have been chosen for that duel. So at the beginning of the game, you're just running out into the forest, and then later on, you're going out into the Skylands, and then even later, you go into the caverns. And there is a theme ingredient that is presented to you at the beginning, sort of like, well, really any good food cooking competition. Um, so you know that you need to like capture the dragon, for instance, and get the ingredients from the dragon before you go out. But then you can be completely freeform with the rest of your ingredients, especially making you're going to want to make sure you match up your dish to the judge preferences. They might want something that has more fire or has some balance of two different flavors. Um, so you have some constraints that you're trying to do, like not poison the judges and give them their preference and make sure you don't forget the required ingredient. But then a lot of the other decisions about the ingredients in your dish are really dictated by um, what sort of combat loadout you've chosen or what cookware loadout you've chosen so that you're being efficient in how you hunt and how you cook.
So, because I know we talked about it before we started recording, that in my eyes, I kind of get like a Monster Hunter the puzzle game kind of feel to it, which isn't a bad thing. I think Monster Hunter is an awesome game. So, I didn't know if people were saying that about the same thing about Battle Chef Brigade or. Um,
Yeah, we've definitely got some Monster Hunter comparisons, and we certainly do hunt monsters, though it's not to the like scale of Monster Hunter. Um, and we're like really focused on these 5 to 10 minute duels in the story where you're having a cooking duel against some opponent that you've challenged in town. And so there's this sort of like core loop that's pretty different from Monster Hunter, but it's definitely a fair comparison.
did you feel that if you guys made too big of monsters in the game, something like Monster Hunter, that you'd be afraid that it would detract from the actual core cooking gameplay?
Um, I think that probably would be the case that it might detract from the experience because as a chef in one of these duels, you don't want to be spending like a huge amount of time out just fighting one monster or just getting a few ingredients. Um, but it's something that we're interested in seeing if we can make work one way or another. Because I think it would be exciting, but it's also hard in the context of a duel. It's sort of optimal for the player to be running out, collecting ingredients, filling up their satchel, bringing those back, doing some cooking, and then getting more ingredients and going back and forth. So if you spend too much time out, like fighting a really impressive giant Monster Hunter style monster, that would probably break down the core gameplay a bit.
And it would take a very long time to beat them.
Yeah,
At least you guys have health bars, where in Monster Hunter, it's like, is it dead yet? Who knows?
just keep going.
You just keep going until finally a cutscene or something happens, and you're like, ah, cool, I beat it. I did it, I guess. So I'm really bad at Monster Hunter. So you guys actually got published by Adult Swim Games. How did that whole thing happen?
It was a very long process. So we're a team of three, and so we realized pretty early on that well, I guess it's clear to a lot of indies that the big problem with being an indie game developer is reaching a large enough audience. And so we initially viewed a publisher as a really good way to get marketing help, and just like using their reach to sort of empower us to reach a larger audience. Um, and that was our initial goal. And we actually started talking to Adult Swim way back when we were really even starting. And they were like, we just sort of kept in touch at different PAXs and at GDC. And then they sort of like grew up alongside us because they initially started in mobile and they started putting their toes in the water, in the console water. Um, and their booths would be larger and larger each time we were at PAX. And they're actually across from us at PAX West 2014 maybe. Um, we were in the Indie Showcase or the PAX 10, yeah, the PAX 10, and they're right across the aisle from us, so we got to chat then too, and we got to see their booth grow from fairly small to like really cool. And then at some point we realized like, wow, it'd be a lot better if they were handling all the um, giant crap that we were lugging around to each show. They have really nice like sort of kiosks that are like band kits that just sort of like unfold, and all of a sudden you've got a computer or a console and a screen set up. Whereas we'd been like jamming monitors and computers into all sorts of luggage and then checking that into to fly to Boston or Seattle, and that was a huge pain. And so we started seeing those benefits beyond marketing, and then just came down to talking with all the different publishers we'd been discussing this with and figuring out who the best one was.
So it's kind of like a band where they were a DIY band and then they got signed to a major label and now everything seems a lot better.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like we absolutely could not have launched this year without their help. They're like super great at handling so much of the painful process. Just getting a game onto a storefront is a huge deal, and they were able to handle a lot of that. And they have a lot more experience doing that than we did. So it's super helpful to have someone who already knows what they're doing.
And plus the stress of taking your own stuff and letting the airlines take care of it is always just horrible because you never know what's going to happen. You open up the box and you notice that your monitor has just been completely shattered by a guy who just did not care at all. So
Yeah, that's the worst.
so let's see. So the only thing I guess I ask of then is for Battle Chef Brigade, what does a game mean to you, and what advice would you give people that are trying to get into the game industry?
I'm super proud of Battle Chef Brigade. I think it's definitely the biggest game that we worked on. We worked together, all three of us, back at Wide Load Games, which is bought by Disney here in Chicago. Um, and even then, when we were working on teams of 30 plus, um, we still had sort of tighter deadlines, and we weren't as I guess just like coordinating that many people was hard. And so I feel like Battle Chef Brigade is actually more complicated, at least because we're doing a hybrid genre and all that, than some of the games we worked on at a larger studio. And so it's fascinating to see uh, all of our hard work come to fruition, because we initially sort of just quit that job because we thought we could do better ourselves. And I think that we proved that we can at least do a really good job. And yeah, so as for advice, I'd say the way I've been thinking about it recently is that there's sort of two big steps as towards at least indie game development. Um, the first one, and which is totally applicable to anyone just wanting to get into the games industry at all, is just learning to make games, period. And that can include making bad games or games that are just clones of other games so you can learn. And that's really hard by itself, because game development is really hard just without any the constraints of trying to make a marketable game. So just that level, I think, can be achieved just by putting in work. It's not particularly glamorous, and it's just a huge amount of time. It's slightly easier nowadays with Unity and Unreal and Game Maker, and you can find a lot of tutorials, and you can just get good at making basic games. Period. Then there's the additional pain of learning to work with a team, and but then the next big step is making a marketable game, and that's when it's just really hard to be indie, and you got to find an idea that has a really good hook and gets people interested. And that is really hard. You'll see a lot of Kickstarters and just new game developers making games that are still clones of other games, or I cloned this game but I made this one change. And so getting both those steps down is the key, where you learn how to make a game itself, you learn all the different aspects, and then you learn how to work with a team, and then you take that next step of picking ideas to work on that are actually smart, instead of just making games that have been seen before.
I always try to tell people when they are doing anything on their own, because I do get some of my friends that ask about making a podcast and stuff and how it's done. It's like, well, just just start and just see where it goes from there. Because I remember early episodes, it sounded like crap. I'm not gonna lie, it sounded terrible. But I mean, the people I had on were great. But it's weird because you don't know what you're gonna do, what you're gonna try and like accomplish with it. But just keep moving forward with it, and just don't be too hard on yourself when things start to fold, I guess. And then yeah, no, it's weird. I guess it just becomes completely unpredictable. And man, I had a really great thing that I was gonna say too, and I just completely forgot what I was gonna say. But yeah, no, just don't be hard on yourself, and just keep being motivated, and at least try to finish what you're doing. That's what I've been told, at least.
Yeah, that's definitely a key.
So, Tom, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Thank you so much for talking about Battle Chef Brigade. And anybody out there that wants to check out Battle Chef Brigade, where can they find it?
The easiest spot is battlechefbrigade.com, or they can check us out at Battle Chef Game on Twitter. Or, I don't know, if you type Battle Chef Brigade into any search engine, you're going to find all sorts of Battle Chef Brigade. You'll probably find the Steam link first and the Nintendo Switch link second.
So you can play it on PC or Nintendo Switch. Does the Nintendo Switch have HD Rumble?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we actually did some fun stuff. Like while you're cooking, you can feel the fire in the pan or the bubbles while you're boiling. That was particularly fun because we get to do the sort of like low level HD Rumble, and then we can add on other rumbles on top of that, and it feels really cool.
That's even more of a reason to get it on the Nintendo Switch as well. Get it for both, If you feel weird owning 2 copies of the same game, gift it to a friend. They're not going to feel weird about having a free game. So definitely check out Battle Chef Brigade. If you enjoy cooking, if you enjoy puzzle games, if you enjoy platformers, or just good games in general, I highly recommend it. So thank you guys so much for listening. Thank you again, Tom, for coming on. And if you have not checked out any other episodes of Gamer Weekly, you should do that. Please. You'll enjoy it. I promise. So thank you guys so much, and goodbye.